So I'm very happy to be here. I was invited last year to do a talk, which is for me a bit weird because I don't consider myself a front-end or a web person. But last time when I was here, I learned many things. I learned how capable HTML has become, and that I don't need to use JavaScript. And in the JavaScript talks, I learned how capable JavaScript had become. So it was a very fruitful meeting for me. And there I told about from my perspective, the incredibly terrible state of your world. And specifically, I spoke about if you run npm, you get 1,600 dependencies, and that you don't know what you're shipping. And yeah, we'll get back to that a little bit. I'm very happy to talk here again. And I want to start with this happy message. You and me, developers, we have never been as powerful as we are today. And it might not feel that way when you sit behind your computer and you think, well, I don't particularly feel very powerful right now. But I want to sort of go back to the really old days. And I don't want to show this to show just how old I am. But I spent 22 years developing PowerDNS. And when we started, we had 3 servers. Tinky Winky, Lala, Dipsy, and Po. So we had 4. And everything had to fit on those 4 servers. And the developers had no choice in picking the servers. The developers could not spend any money. There was no way for a developer to order up a database or any kind of service. It was just Tinky Winky, Lala, Dipsy, and Po that had to do all the work. And if the programmers wanted something else, sorry. It's changed tremendously. You are now, as developers, very much in charge of what services get used. And if you need more database, you get more database. If the database is not fast enough, you can say, hey, the database is not fast enough. Whereas a long time ago, it was if the database was not fast enough, well, you also ran the database. So apparently, that was your fault. So in the 22 years, I've seen many different things. I've worked for the Dutch intelligence agency. I did DNA research. I was even one of the regulators of the intelligence services, and I stopped doing all that, so now I'm back to developing stuff. But this has given me a bit of a broad overview. One important thing already, if at any point during this talk you think Bert is full of shit, then raise your hand and you can immediately say it's wrong or it doesn't work for me like that, so please do feel free to do that. A year ago, I spoke here about npm and 1,600 dependencies and shipping 5 million lines of code and not knowing what was in there. And that eventually led to a talk for the Dutch Electoral Board, where I also work a little bit on long-term software development. And I asked my Mastodon friends, I say, hey, if I have a software project and it's going to last 10 years, what would you tell me? What would your advice be to keep the software alive for 10 years? And they came up with many very interesting things, and I can recommend this blog post. One of the things we really identified was that we originally talked about dependencies that you can select at build time, which is already sort of 1,600 of them. But now we also have runtime dependencies. That we build a project and we say, well, the project does not just rely on my code and these libraries, but it also relies on these third-party services. So this is me also talking in Dutch Parliament, which is nice, but recently, yesterday, someone says, Bert, are you technical? That nearly kills me. I mean, people have now assumed that if you can sit like this and talk in Parliament, that apparently you're not a nerd. And I want to reassure you, I definitely am a nerd. But I don't just show this to brag, but you have a lot of talks about maybe people that are not developing that much and are talking more, or by people that are not actually providing services to people. And I also do that. This is a site that we will be talking about, opentk.nl, which is for the Dutch House of Parliament, the second chamber. And this is a website that shows you everything that happens in Parliament, and it is better than the real Parliament site. At least that's what they tell me. And people rely on this stuff. So if this is broken, I get a lot of complaints, which gives me a little bit of feeling how is it to provide services. This is actually live, and we can have we have one member of Parliament whose birthday it is today, so we can all celebrate him. Yeah. This is my other big project, Galileo, GPS, GLONASS, and Baidu satellite navigation system monitoring stuff. And people actually rely on this stuff, which is rather scary because you think that these satellite projects could have some money to build their own monitoring. Anyhow, the reason why this talk is extra interesting is because the world is getting more complicated. It used to be a no-brainer to say, I'm going to transfer all the Dutch healthcare data to Amazon. That used to be completely normal. It was already illegal, by the way. This was never legal. But strangely enough, we just did it because, yeah, well, you got to do something. And this is now changing. Now, all of a sudden, if you decide to put your data in one country, people are going to ask questions. Are you sure about that? Can we rely on that country or not? Might we in the future have an issue? A year ago, this would not have been an item. But now it's becoming an item. That happened here. In the US, they do not factually have privacy. It's a legal thing. But they built an extra privacy court, especially for the EU, which is nice of them. And this is President Donald Trump saying we're going to stop with the special privacy board, which technically speaking already makes it sort of foreseeably illegal to put your hospital data on Amazon already. We're sort of pretending that this picture didn't happen because it's sort of sad news if someone said, look, you got to stop using Azure and Microsoft and AWS. That would be, well, distressing for many people. But this picture does exist. And I want to talk a little bit about dependencies. You can have a dependency where you say, hey, I have a copy of this file, and it does some things for me, and it's going to be with you forever. It's in the file, it's in your source code, it's in there. No one is ever going to take it away from you. So that's with you forever. You're still depending on it because you're hoping that the people that made that code will update it for the new versions, will do security releases and stuff, but if they don't do that, you still have the code. In the middle is the dynamic stuff. So let's say NPM or Node or that ecosystem goes away. Can you still build your product? Well, you cannot. And there are many people that know this because if you try to build anything serious, you try to do that from a non-internet connected environment. These people have pain because they cannot do NPM install. So that was my talk last year. And the third line is what I want to talk about today, the runtime service dependencies. So it's very common now to say, hey, we're using S3, we're using DynamoDB or RDS or Route 53 or other things, which means that the thing you build is not complete without the services from someone else. And it's just good to recognize these three layers. And then there are shallow dependencies, where you say, for example, in the previous talk, they spoke about runtime user monitoring, real-time user monitoring. We can say, well, I depend on some kind of external service, but if it doesn't work, it's not so bad. Then my site still works, I just don't have the live monitoring. But you also have the deep dependencies, where you say, my site, my project, my app has no chance in hell of working if the external dependency does not cooperate or is not with me. So it's pretty good to split it up in these three levels and then in shallow and deep. Now, I want to do a little experiment because I'm like super interested in your experience. So first, let me explain what I mean by this, because I'm going to ask you a question later, not now, that says, if you had your own choice, so you're not representing your employer or anything, it's just your own personal preference, how would you deploy your project? And I've invented a few categories: Google, Amazon, Azure, where you use lots of services. Where you say, hey, I'm like deep in the ecosystem, I'm really benefiting from S3 or DynamoDB or Cognito or whatever. Or do you prefer deploying to some kind of Kubernetes setup or to a virtual machine? And that on the right, maybe many of you may never have seen one, that's an actual server. This is really worrying. So I'm going to ask you, so show of hands, who prefers to deploy on Google with lots of services? That's bad news for Google, this. Okay, AWS. Well, okay, they're doing better. Azure. I get the impression that the only people that want to use Azure are like really corporate places that already have a deal in place. Yeah, yeah. Okay, who likes deploying to Kubernetes? That's good stuff. Virtual machines. Yeah. Bare metal. Wow, you're a good audience. Thank you. That gives me some hope. I've been in other places where I was like, does anything beyond AWS exist even? So this is good news. Good news. Okay, because you have to realize if you walk into the sort of menu of options at a modern cloud provider, AWS or Google or Azure, it's like a candy store. They have like everything. You can almost, Amazon has a satellite ground station module. I'm not sure what it does, but you can order it. Maybe one day I should and see what happens. But it's if you walk, they have a solution for everything, and it's really very, very impressive. And I can truly understand that if you want to build something, you're like, hey, I'm going to take a trip to the candy store and see what they have. And like I said at the beginning, you have this enormous power right now. As developers, if you have this cloud ability, you can go to the candy store and pick whatever you want, and many things are free, initially at least. Just at first. So yeah, I can see how that influences people. And like I said, developers have never been this powerful, so congratulations. I sometimes think back to Tinky Winky, Lala, Dipsy, and Paul, who had more power than I did. And so congrats. But with great power also comes great responsibility. Yeah, sorry, it's not free. And because we've been making many choices. And when I speak to sort of policymakers right now, and politicians who are often confused, their vision, their idea right now is that you can only do internet with the big cloud. That it's impossible to do anything else. And in a sense, they are right, because there is a generation of developers that actually cannot do anything else, because that's all they know. So these are people that can actually not work with computers, they work with services. And okay, but that has now settled in as a sort of reality that for many people it's like the internet begins and ends with a hyperscaler cloud. And that's a problem, because, well, first we have to I want to take a small step back. Who makes these choices? I said that you were very powerful, which is in a sense true. It's actually not how it should be. Because as developers, we make choices, but we do not have budget responsibility. So we might pick a super expensive Amazon service, initially works rather well, and eventually we find that we are bankrupting the company because we picked a service that eventually becomes just unaffordable. But no, there was no, when I ask around, there are people like, how do you make these cost estimates? Who decides what we're going to use? People say, yeah, we just put it together and see what happens. That's a bit scary, because there are also long-term consequences. Because if you integrate enough third-party services into your thing, you've actually chosen Microsoft as your subcontractor. They are actually your supplier from now on. And no one sat down and said, shall we choose to tie our future to Microsoft? No, it just happened. It's a bit of a problem, because this is sort of the world right now, as viewed from many people. And some of you have already seen it. Down the E from Google are a few European companies. You have to sort of look really well. So hang on, the laser pointer wants to laser. Oh, yeah, over here. And that's a bit of a problem, because that leads to this map. This is where we get our cloud from here in Europe. And I'm like really happy that in Europe we're good with cheese and handbags. We're quite good at designing handbags also in Europe. And we make the chip-making machines. So it's maybe good to realize that all these clouds come out of the chip-making machine that we make here in Europe. So that's nice. But otherwise, it's not so nice that if you are a hospital right now, and you say, hey, I have these terabytes or petabytes of X-ray images, and I want to store them somewhere, that people say, you can only do that with American companies. You have no choice at all. There is no alternative. And many people truly believe this, and on some level it is also true. That's not a happy situation. Even if we had like super friendly, normal people in America. So, when we think about these third-party choices, what does it all cost? Well, we now have this thing called FinOps, where you try to reverse engineer why it is costing so much. There's this other thing going on at very big, serious corporations, where they now are sort of like, yeah, we want to know exactly the costs from everything, so we're going to make ordering stuff from the cloud as difficult as it was as ordering a server in 1997. So that's the new thing. So they are going to take your power away, sadly. So get used to the forms. Can we be held hostage? So we put all our customer data in this cloud thing. Can we meaningfully get that customer data out again? Or will we have to ask all our users to reset their passwords? Because we are so deep in the ecosystem that Amazon now knows our users' passwords, but we do not. That's the thing. Could the provider make choices that we don't like? Like, hey, we put AI in your thing. No one wanted the AI in the thing, but they said, yeah, we put AI in the thing. Oh, it sucks. Sanctions. We'll get to that. But it's entirely possible now for a foreign government to say, we no longer like your thing, and you are no longer allowed to use this cloud. That's a problem. And the reverse can also happen. It is entirely possible, any day now, that in Brussels they say, okay, the show is over. No more medical data to the clouds. It could happen tomorrow. I don't think so, but it would be possible. And the last one I also want to touch is it all efficient? I mentioned this candy store where you can pick these million different features. Not everyone picks them wisely. So I want to share one anecdote. I built this parliamentary monitoring system, and it needed to download all the parliamentary documents first. It's like 180 gigabytes. And that would sometimes stop. The downloading would stop, which is like, that's sad. And then it turned out that the whole service was down. Because what happened, and I was just downloading PDFs. So there's nothing exciting about downloading a PDF. But the designers of the site had built a sort of, they looked at the Azure menu, and they're like, we're going to use all of it. And so the actual downloading turned out to get the file from a database, put it in a queue, then it would go to another queue, and then there was a bit of JavaScript, and that would actually trigger the download. And the thing is, it did all of this in memory. And some of these parliamentary documents are like hundreds of megabytes large. And so they then asked me, could you please, they were very nice people at Parliament, by the way. They said, okay, it's fine, but can you not do this on Friday? Because it sucks. So, okay. So then I built special features to only not download the large files. So I would first try to figure out the size of the file, which is not even that easy, because this whole chain, because it's no longer, I wasn't downloading a file, I was downloading a service. And so there are these risks that you build all this stuff in this cloud, which is supposedly efficient, but it might not actually end up being any more efficient. So this is what I mentioned. US cloud is soon illegal. This is a legal analysis where they say, well, actually the framework under which we can store our medical data in the US is actually bullshit right now. Because it supposedly works because there's a special committee in the US that can, where you could complain, and on day one, Trump fired all the Democrats on that committee, and it's now no longer working. So it's like you sometimes have these cartoons where you see the Roadrunner, and the Roadrunner runs off the rock, and he's about to fall down, but he doesn't realize it yet. And that's where we are with the legal situation on sharing data with clouds. It should be illegal, but they just haven't signed the papers yet. And it would suck. It really, really suck when that happens. So at this point, we are in a situation that we have these huge American clouds that are many, and they're, by the way, pretty good at many of the things that they do. There are many people that also hate the cloud, and I'm not here, especially not to hate AWS, because that tends to work. But we rely on that tremendously right now, which is not nice that we can only get our services from America, and it's not nice that we in Europe are starting to forget how all of this stuff actually works, which is not nice. And it is also pretty expensive. Because many of you will have had this situation that someone comes to you and says, well, we spent like, I don't know, 150K with Amazon, and does anyone know why that happened? That's a scary situation. We would not want that. Now, I'm an old school nerd. I like to keep my stuff simple. I'm not into assembly, and I don't know how a soldering iron works. I cannot do that, so I'm not a full-stack developer that way. But I'm sort of medium stack developer in the sense that I can still work with computers. And I'm also just a bit weird because I like doing stuff myself. And so I want to introduce sort of the concept of the microstack. But first I wanted to show you what I built. I already showed this page, the parliamentary monitoring system. And this updates every minute. So this is a live screen, everything that happens in Parliament. You can see it right now. And it has all these options on top there, where you can pick the various things. And for example, this is what a simple document. This is the Dutch government that has said every time someone applies for a job at our Secret Service, we have to tell Google. And so they asked questions in Parliament. I wrote those questions. And they asked it, and the Dutch government, they came back and they said, we don't know how anything works anymore. And then they said, we have to tell Google how this works because it's more expensive to do it ourselves. And so I looked it up, and it's like 10,000 euros they're talking about. So they thought it was a good idea to just send everyone who applies for a job in the Netherlands, send their data to Google. They assure me it is legal. And it's probably legal unless, of course, the thing happens here. I mean, when this happens, it's no longer legal, but for now it's legal. And anyhow, this is an example of a page in the website. And the key thing here, and that's important to realize, is I convert all these documents back to HTML. Dutch Parliament really loves PDF. And so eventually, anything they get, they turn it into a PDF. One of the things that web users really hate are PDFs. And so every document over there goes through 4 stages, and in every stage I convert it back to HTML. And so that you can just see that page in line. This has an interesting side effect. There are a few blind people working for the Dutch government, and they're like super happy with my site. Because their screen reader is like, oh, we get this, we get this. And so I feel an extra responsibility to keep this working because I know that these people rely on it. So there's a lot of work. There's a search engine in there, and I'm pretty happy with the search engine. So if you search for our friend Ivo here, it gets you the results in 5.6 milliseconds, which is nice. And now some statistics. So we have 160 gigabytes of documents, of which a lot is just text. It's terrible. I made statistics. Dutch Parliament talks like 1 million words a week. It's just, no one can read that, but they do it. And they have individual meetings where they decide on like 5 million words, where they say, yeah, it's all good. Well, you wonder, well, did you read the 5 million words? Probably not. But it's a lot. So we have 800,000 documents, 3,000 updates or changes a week. Many of these documents are actually PDFs, because they love PDFs. And some of them are actually scanned PDFs of paper. And so I also OCR them again, which is, again, super nice for the blind people, and also for the search engine. They have millions of meetings. They literally have millions of meetings, and agenda items, and votes, and official decisions. And there are thousands of changes that happen every day on meetings that get planned, or the meeting notes get published. The service has 8,000 weekly active users. It's actually a sort of a guess because I'm into privacy, so I don't really know how many users there are. But from statistical measures, I'm confident in saying there are between 4,000 and 16,000 active users. There are 1,700 configured monitors. So a monitor is where you say, I need to get a notification the moment a parliamentary document mentions the word Star Trek or whatever, which they actually do sometimes. And it's like real fun, because if you configure these monitors on just subjects that you care about, where you live or whatever, you will just occasionally get a document or a hit. And that was the original use case. The original use case for this site was that there was a law that got passed which would allow the Dutch government to just block websites. And that was frightening because many people in the internet community found out about that law on Friday. And it was going to pass on Tuesday. And I thought that is never going to happen again. We as internet community, we must get an alert so that because if you get an alert early enough, like 3 months in advance, you can contact people and tell them, no, don't do it like this, or if you do it like that. So that was the original use case. And it turns out that this has actually worked. There is one of the internet geeks that maintains a large network here, and he likes windmills. And so he's a member of the Windmill Cooperation. And they found out 3 months in advance that some kind of rule was about to change, and they were able to act on that. So I'm very happy that that worked. The site has 300 gigabytes of traffic per month. On the one hand, that is a lot. On the other hand, is also not a lot. Key to that is also that the site is tiny. Like there is no 2 megabytes of JavaScript to download. There's no image on the site at all. There's one little guy that raises his hand, but he's an emoticon. So it saves a lot of traffic. And it's up to date within a single minute. And I also measure the latency, and the average latency is 16 milliseconds for something out, which is like not a lot. It is a very advanced full text search. I don't know if you have that feeling sometimes, that you have a search engine and you search for something and it doesn't find it. And you're like, but I'm sure that it's there. I think the search engine is not good. That is not this search engine. This search engine actually finds everything. Because I debug that, so sometimes it doesn't find something, and I go like, why not? And then you find that the one document that has in there has like a weird Unicode thing going on, and then I also fix that. One of the interesting things that I learned here is that iPhones, in search queries, will, if you put a quote in there, an iPhone will turn that into a smart quote. Which is nice, because the search engine doesn't know about that. It goes hunting for smart quotes then. So it now also converts back the smart quotes into dumb quotes again. It has these monitors, so like 2,000 notifications a day based on 1,700 monitors, and it's maintenance-free. I love to stress that part because I have no time to do maintenance. So I cannot build something complicated, because if it's complicated, it's fragile. So I can just forget about this stuff, and it just works. And so, okay, so this is enough bragging now. I want to show you, some more bragging, some stats. So it does like 5 gigabytes a day, except when we're on TV, in which case it does a bit more. Just remember this big peak, because it's like 5 times more than normal, 6 times more. This was, I think, a newspaper article. And this is the latency graph. And you can see that I keep making it better, so it's now at 15 milliseconds. Actually, I cheated a little bit. I installed 32 gigabytes additional RAM here. Which is, that cost me like €100, so that was a good investment. And here you see the latency graph. This is the big peak, and this color means that it's like super fast. This means that like it's unreasonably fast. So this is nice. So now is a good point to ponder. You heard the numbers of documents in there, like 180 gigabytes or 160 gigabytes of text, 800,000 documents, 3,000 new ones come in every day. How would you build this? So this is not really an open question, but it's sort of an exercise. Would you use Elasticsearch or S3 buckets for all the documents? How would you do the login for things? And what do you think it would cost if you built this? And I think if you mentally go over this, you'll already see a lot of options, but you would also realize, well, it could actually cost some real money to do this stuff and use some pretty heavy services, because 180 gigabytes of documents, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's still not nothing either. Just let it ponder this a little bit. And now I want to introduce you to the microstack. How is this actually built? And this is, by the way, everything. This is, and I mean really everything. So including how the backups work, and the monitoring, and the graphing, and the failover equipment. And it's basically SQLite. And people have like strange ideas about SQLite, that it's not a real database or anything. I had some interesting discussions with the PostgreSQL people who built a real database. They are not looking down on SQLite. They're like, hey, they made their choices, we made our choices, we're both serious databases. And especially the search engine is just ridiculously good. And I'm not sure how that happened, but I do have a theory. This search engine is used, amongst other things, by Apple Mail. And I get the impression that Apple at one point just donated a guy. And said, here, just make it terrific, because it's a terrific search engine. It does snippets of your hits, and super fast, and it has these weird optimized modes. So for example, it can do a so-called contentless index, which means that if you have your 100 gigabytes of database here, then the index is actually far smaller than that. Like really, it can do the whole index at like 2 gigabytes, which is amazing that they can do that. But they do that by sort of not having the content in there. It only has pointers to the actual content. It's like super magic, the way they do that. SQLite 3 rsync is an interesting primitive. This allows you to synchronize a running SQLite database to another server. And you can continue working on it on the reading side and on the writing side. So that means that if you want to have 10 servers, well, by all means. And this is, again, super robust, because I have no time for maintenance. And everyone knows that database replication, it's not always robust, let me put it that way. On the front-end side, alpine.js, which I am not able to install Angular or React. I'm not sure. Whenever I try, I go like, oh, too much bullshit. But I know I'm missing out on some great things. I know that there are some good things in there, but I really like the Alpine is just enough magic. So it synchronizes fields and spans and everything. So it's pretty nice. I don't know CSS at all, so I found this file, and you put that in your project, and it looks pretty good. So I really recommend that. Now, I'm a C++ nerd, and turns out we also have Jinja in C++. It's called Inja. I don't know where the J went, but... And you can connect that straight to SQLite Writer, which is a small ORM on top of SQLite. This is the XML engine that's like you can fire shells at it. It will always work. And the nice thing about Poogie XML is that everyone uses it, which means that if you use it, you can also read everything, because otherwise no one can read it. This is also a wonderful open source project, OCR MyPDF. It doesn't look like an open source project named this way, but it really is. And you can just give a horrible PDF to it, and it will OCR it for you and make it nice. It's super fun. And actually, it's sort of fun that I have to do this, because the Dutch government has these accessibility regulations, where they say that all the PDFs must have this, but apparently a few hundred per week don't. And I've offered them to send them back the documents improved, but they're not feeling it yet. Pandoc is nice. Like I said, I try to convert everything back to HTML, and Pandoc just does that for me. Other interesting thing is, because it's like a 24/7 service, you need to have it redundant in some way. So I have a KPN internet connection and a Ziggo internet connection, and I use a DNS trick. I have a name server on both these connections. And if the KPN is down, then the KPN name server also goes down, and no one gets the KPN IP address anymore, which is like a super simple hack. I had to get a patch installed in PowerDNS to make that happen, which was sort of interesting, because I don't work there anymore. But so I went through the normal process, and they fully ignored me for half a year. It's just like how well things are going. No, they fixed it. But this is pretty nice. And the interesting thing of this is you could also have 2 of these servers in completely different places, because the DNS trick continues to work, even if you have. So this is essentially the same as having 2 accessibility zones, but then, in your house. Grafana for the graphing, which is with the GraphQL, Restic for the backups, and Simplomon is my own little monitoring thing. The nice thing about Simplomon is it also monitors your TLS certificates, how they expire and stuff. On the site, I also monitor the TLS certificates of the Dutch Parliament. Has once helped already.
Where do you live?
I live in The Hague, so that's how it happens.
What is the place burns?
Yeah, well, like I said, you can put it in 2 places. You can just have an installation in one house and in another place, and the DNS trick continues to work. So if one house burns down, it doesn't matter. But I have a special slide for you in 3 slides ahead, so we'll get to that. This is really how the ORM works, and it's like really simple again. But the nice thing I like is it has a straight path. You just select star from sessions, and that then goes straight on to alpine.js. So you have no need to repeat yourself in any way. You can just straight from SQL into the JavaScript or into the Inja or Jinja, which is like really nice when you do it that way. And the SQL injection, no, because we leave that to SQLite. That's a nice thing, because it would be terrible if there were a SQL injection vulnerability in SQLite. But again, that would be terrible for everyone. Yeah. So, this is what it runs on. In actual, the server is smaller than this. And it sits on my desk. So I put the additional 32 gigabytes in there, which is nice. It has 6 cores, and I estimate that if you are honest about what does this server cost me, it would be like 500 euros a year. And that would be including that you have to replace it after a few years, and that it also uses power and other stuff. But it's like, this is a very real estimate. I could also argue that it costs 250 euros a year, and I could also argue that it costs 1,000 euros a year. But just put it in that ballpark. And this is the CPU load of the whole thing. It's, on average, it's around 1%. And it could go up to 600%. So it has some headroom. The cost graph. And again, this is a little bit, this is the cloud arrow. It starts off very small. I mean, if you have no project, you can be in the free tier, it costs you nothing. But eventually, you don't yet know if the load on your site increases, you don't yet know if you have this cost curve or this one. You will find out in production. And whereas I have to spend 1,000 euros to get started, because otherwise I have nothing. But I know that for now, I'm like, I know that my server will scale like 20 times more traffic right now. So for now, I have no worries. But it's good to realize that this is sort of the difference between doing it in the cloud and doing it on your Lenovo server. Now, does this scale? And was Bert free? Yeah, for me, from my perspective, I was free. But you might struggle to find developers that actually know how a computer works. And that could make it very expensive to do this kind of thing with your microstack. The redundancy thing, you would have to do a little bit more work on that to distribute the data to a different place, so that if my house burns down, that the data is still there. And the other thing that I find very crucial, I had to implement sign-on. So enter your email address, you get an email message, you have to respond, you have to confirm that you want to become a user. And when I did that, I found that some government users could not log into my site, which is very interesting. It turns out that at some level, Microsoft 365 will actually click on all the links in your email and execute the JavaScript in there, and will post. Now, we know that it's a sort of crime to post on behalf of someone, but by Microsoft, they were like, let's give it a try. And I could solve that because I'm a big nerd. However, stuff like AWS Cognito would also have solved this for you, because they already know about this problem. So if you decide to do this stuff yourself, you run the risk that all of a sudden some users cannot log in anymore because you're not aware of what Microsoft changed. So it's not all fun to do this yourself. You have to have like this 25-year experience. And the other thing is, when you do the Googles of the Amazon stuff, you get they have all these certifications. And now I know what these certifications mean, which is not that much, but there are many places that really love the certificates. And that ISO 27001 thing, that some good stuff in some places. And I don't have it. I don't have it. But also the other way around, if you just put it in the cloud, could I be locked out of my own data? I have to watch the news all day long to figure out what Trump said. I don't want to watch the news all day long. I do not want to know about GDPR Special Category Article 9 regulations, which you will have to think if you do anything with healthcare or mental disease or stuff, or if you are a member of a trade union, which is for some reason also special category data, you would have to start following the news. You have to start the FinOps department. Very sorry for that. And you might have accidentally married Microsoft for life. Without even realizing it, it might just become too expensive to get out. This stuff is not theoretical. The International Crime Court, they feel they will be locked out of Azure, and they have everything on Azure, which they should have thought about a bit earlier, maybe. But they are now seriously worried that they one day show up at the office and they cannot log in anymore, because there are now sanctions applied to them. The Dutch National Bank, they also said, banks should prepare for being locked out of their clouds. Right now, all Dutch banks would come to an immediate halt when it happens. This is not a situation you want to be in. So the stuff I told you about having to worry about Article 9 GDPR data, it is not so theoretical, even though you might want to ignore it. And again, I want to repeat this. You are like super powerful, which means that you also have a role in this. Whenever you pick a new project, this means I have to stop. Let's do the last slide then. The last slide is you don't need to go full microstack. So don't all buy small Lenovo servers and put them on your desk. You really don't need to do that. But you can think ahead and say, okay, am I going to use these deep dependencies over at AWS or Microsoft and Google, the things that really get into the heart of my project, things that I will never get out again. And it might be wise to not do that. That could also save you a lot of money, because eventually some of these things become very expensive, and if you have no way to get out, because you would have to redo your whole project, you're just going to have to pay the bill. Another nice thing is you can... Whoa. Yeah. You don't need to go full microstack. You could just go like mesostack or millistack, where you say, hey, I just reduced my dependencies to a manageable level, and I know I could get out. And the final thing I want to show you, I already said that, think about who is thinking about this. Do we have a dependency board? Do we have meetings about that? Or did we just pick something and it worked and we went live and now we find out? So it might be good to add this to the stand-up or the whatever thing people do these days and think that through. I'm just going to skip that one. If we are a bit smart, we can create a healthier and more resilient ecosystem for everyone. And also, I can tell you, building a microstack is a lot of fun. So you don't need to rationalize it. You can just say, hey, I love doing this stuff. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And that was it.